Okay, so this is TEAS version 4 mock reading. I will make this as fast as I possibly can without hopefully leaving anything out that might be helpful, since a lot of you will want to listen to this pretty quickly. I'm not going to outline passages. If there is a particular passage you want the outline for, you can let me know, but hopefully by now you're getting pretty proficient at it. I did a reading 1 through 3 intense review recently as well that you can get if you do want to see more outlining. I do very intensive outlining there. And by now, hopefully you are outlining every time you see a paragraph. You're never forgetting that, and hopefully you're doing really well at it, because that will definitely help. I will note the answer to all these questions. I'll note what class it comes from, and I will point out any answer choice you could be torn with, but not so much answer choices that are usually going to be obvious to you that they're not the right answer. One note that I'll make about that, I wanted this particular mock to be more focused on making sure I do point out what class something is from, but in going through my paper copy to make sure I have every class origination labeled, I realized why I suck at that is because a lot of times there isn't a class. As much as I do teach and cover and practice with you on every single question type you're ever going to see, a lot of them don't exactly have a class. You just see them all the way through your reading classes, and you see them many, many times. And so I will label them reading 1 if they're not a big topic of discussion that happens somewhere, because really, if it's a question that asks just kind of a direct question out of the passage that I guess you should know the answer to because you read the passage, you would call that reading 1 because it's going to come from your understanding of the passage, the ideas that are in the passage, the focuses that are in the passage, and the way that the author is using the information. So if something doesn't have like a big subject like purpose, passage type, logical conclusion, main idea, if it's not one of those, you could argue that it comes from reading 1. So if I do forget to label anything and it doesn't have a familiar name, by now you kind of know what everything comes from anyway. It is probably something you could say is from reading 1, because if it doesn't have a name, it just comes down to your critical strategy, your outlining, and your understanding what the main idea is, what the focuses are that are used to illustrate the main idea, and then what the details are that are used to illustrate the focuses. So the first passage is time management. Everything that is on this mock is from the test. Nothing that is on this mock infringes on copyright, just to be very clear. So everything is rearranged. Some of these even lack like an entire paragraph in some instances that's an irrelevant paragraph. So don't be surprised if you read it on the test and you're like, whoa, this is 5 paragraphs and I thought it was 4. I've included anything that's of importance. I've changed a lot of little details that might not be important. I have certainly changed things like sentence structures and word choices and things like that. I've even changed word choices and sentence structures in answer choices. So this certainly does not look identical to the test because I can't do that. But it definitely sets you up to make sure that you have an understanding of all the concepts. So the first question about the time management passage, remembering that there are different rotations of questions. So you could get these 6, or you could get some of these 6, and you could get some other ones. So it totally just depends on exactly what test you get. All of them, as long as you're using critical strategy, you will be able to answer. Question 1 asks, which of the following titles would best summarize the topic of the passage? So you have 3 keywords: title, summarize, and topic. I guess you'd say that's from reading 1 because it's really kind of asking like the topic or the main idea, even though it's a little bit of a blend of all 3. There's not a great perfect answer to this. By far the best one is D, which is implementing skills for effective scheduling. really what you would want to say is like organizing and scheduling, and I'm going to abbreviate that for time's sake, for time management. That's what you hopefully wrote when you wrote your main idea out. But the TEAS is notorious for giving you a second best answer or maybe even a third best. That's how it is. The other answers don't work. It's not about identifying demands of everyday life. It's not about technology and time management, because the organization paragraph had nothing to do with technology. It's talking about file folders. So the only one that works is the last one, which is not exactly a good idea of the topic. They did say topic, so it doesn't have to be dead on with your main idea. 2 says, according to the passage, which of the following is the most important aspect of how the skills discussed are implemented? Of the ones that they gave you, it's consistency. They're not talking about being super thorough. They're talking about always using this, because if one day you write down your tasks and the next day you don't, it's not going to work. You have to always write your tasks down or this won't be effective. 3 is, which of the following individuals exemplifies a recommendation made by the passage? That would be a student who writes down their assignments. That's only because every other example was terrible and they would be somebody who the passage is making fun of potentially. Both of those don't really have something that they're from. So if you want to say they're from a class, they're just from your understanding of the passage. So they're from one. Which of the following words best defines the topic of this passage? So now they want you to do the topic in one word. Of the words you're being given here, it would be efficiency. Efficiency is not the word you wrote when you wrote your topic. But of the ones that you're given here, this is certainly the closest to what the topic is. This passage is an example of what type of writing comes out of reading 2. This would be persuasive. You might have actually felt like they want you to do this. If you didn't feel like they were trying to get you to do this, you at least felt like someone's delivering their opinion. This is not grounded in fact. This was not informational. There was not data for this. It was an opinion piece. It is persuasive. Which of the following sentences restates the main claim? Is close to saying what is the main idea. So that is definitively from English or from reading 1. That is B. Organization and time management work together to improve scheduling. Again, not perfect. What it should say is organization and scheduling work together to improve time management. We take what we can get. The next passage on this one was classic dramatic structure. It goes through the 5 parts of classic dramatic structure, which is a name for a particular type of structure. The first question is, according to the passage, in which of the following parts of classic structure does the protagonist win against the antagonist in a comedy? And that is falling action, because it references that if it's a comedy, they'll win, and if it's a tragedy, they'll fail in a certain paragraph. That comes from 1 because you had to have done your critical strategy, outlined where the different things happened, and that's the only way that you would know that. 8, which of the following titles, proposed titles, best summarizes the main idea of the passage? So you'll notice they're doing a lot of this, like trying to make it sound like they're mixing these different things. So proposed title summarizes main idea is the same thing as saying they want the main idea. And the main idea is more dead on with this one than it was with the other one. The elements, the parts of classic dramatic narrative. They're not saying it's a narrative. They're saying that they're describing a narrative. Which of the following statements from the passage is an opinion? In reading 6, we discussed that there is something that is an opinion, and then there is something that contains an opinion. So this is an opinion, and that would be A. Modern drama tends to be less rigid, more expressive. That doesn't sound overly opinionated. It's not like it says something's great or something is stupid, but it certainly is opinionated if you actually look at it. All the others aren't. There's two of them I want to point out that you could have been a little conflicted with here. One of them is B, because it says the turning point in the plot. A turn is a change. So they're not trying to say turning point like they're trying to make it sound like it's good and it's positive and they're in favor of it. They're just saying the plot changes somehow. That's not opinionated. That would be factual, that it in fact changed. And then when they said happily ever after in C, they've got the quotes around it. So it is literally supposed to be the happily ever after part. The author is not endorsing it as such. They're just naming it that way because that would be what the author of the play or whatever we're talking about would say it was. Number 10 is from reading 2, which of the following best describes the author's purpose. Anytime we get a purpose question that describes the purpose, priority number 1 is the description of the purpose. Priority 2 is this tagline right up at the front. So if you get a great description of the purpose and the tagline is wrong, then you want to see if there's another good description of the purpose before you choose it. And then if not, and typically there wouldn't be, then you can go ahead and pick it. In this case, they're both going to be right. So you're going to notice that we want components of classic dramatic structure. We also want inform or explain. So we're good there. Based on the information in the passage, which of the following sentences would most likely appear in the rising action part of Goldilocks? Hopefully you're familiar with Goldilocks. That would be the porridge part. You could say this is from reading 1, loosely so, because there's lots of questions here since they had all those tiny little paragraphs describing the different parts where you just had to have understood each little paragraph and had some type of outline for yourself where you could zip back and forth and figure out how these different things looked or what they related to. And that just has to do with your critical reading. Your next passage was one of the most hated passages, I would say, on the TEAS, which is about Henry VIII. So this is probably by a long shot the most popular question set with Henry VIII. I get Henry VIII almost every time I test, and I always get this question set. The first question that I got is, what is the meaning of infamous? The meaning of infamous is notorious. That's kind of from reading 1, and it's actually kind of from English 1 because it's one of your words that you're supposed to know. Number 13 is from reading 2. What is the purpose of the passage? What I'm about to say relates to more than just this. This is a biography. This is talking about his life. So this is describing Henry VIII, and it's kind of telling you a segment of his life story. There's a fair amount of different passages on the TEAS and elsewhere that talk about somebody's life story. When somebody's life story is talked about, it is nonfiction, of course, and it is informational. It is informative. It's usually not opinionated, although you might see a little bit of a tone here and there. Somebody that writes a biography might adore them or not so much. So in this case, we're going to answer to inform. And where we often find those is going to come up in reading Mock 5, which would be potentially something like an encyclopedia, a textbook, something that is an academic type source. So if we're reading about someone's life, we need to recognize that we're reading an informational article about someone's life. We don't find that in a newspaper. We don't find it in, a lot of times they'll write bibliography as a choice because it looks so much like biography, but that's a source list, so that's way off. We don't find it in a novel or a fiction or a poetry collection or anything wild like that. We find it in an academic source because it's sort of a profile of their life. So that would be like an encyclopedia or a textbook. There are more than one passage that come up like this. So make sure you recognize if they are telling about somebody's life or a segment of somebody's life. Very frequently, it's somebody famous in history. So they talk about just kind of the famous or the historically important part of their life. 14 says, which of the following is a logical conclusion based on the last paragraph? Of course, to do well with that, you have to have read the last paragraph. And there's only one that works. That's from reading 3, of course, and that is going to be B. There's a statement in the last paragraph that says, after Henry's death in 1547, there was a rapid succession of Henry's children to the throne. They had made clear that he kept trying to get a son. He finally did have one, but it was apparent from things they hinted at. In other words, you can infer that he did have other kids in the interim, so he had daughters, we can assume. So it is fair to say that some, we don't know how many or what gender or anything like that, of his children did serve terms as kings or queens between his death and the reign of Queen Elizabeth, who ended up in charge for a long time. That's a reasonable inference because it says there was a rapid succession of his kids to the throne. That tells us they were on the throne, which is they served as kings or queens, and they were short terms because they were rapidly succeeding to the throne. We can't say that his male children were hated by citizens. All we can say is they didn't stay king for very long. We do not have a reason why. We can't say that she ruled with socialist values. We have no idea. And we can't say she was successful because she was female. So all of them are too far, except for choice B. In which of the following sources is the passage most likely to appear? Is from reading 2. I spoiled this because I forgot that I added this question. This actually doesn't show up with the Henry passage. I don't think. Maybe it does. But it does show up with others that are like the Henry VIII passage. This would definitely be from an encyclopedia. Watch out for bibliography. A biography and a bibliography look the same at a glance, and they're nothing alike. An autobiography has to be written by themselves. I would have to write an autobiography as a story about me and my life, and this is not in first person, so he did not write this. The next passage is the gambling passage. Which of the following proposed titles best captures the theme? They're kind of misusing theme here. This is the real question. This is from reading 1, whether it's supposed to be theme or whether it's supposed to be a little bit more like the main idea, which is what it is, but the choice should be A. This was written to say whether directly or maybe a little more indirectly. I think that's why they chose the word theme, is maybe it's a little bit indirect what the point is. State lotteries don't waste your time. That would be the point that was kind of trying to be made. And then that would make the second answer about author's purpose, to persuade readers to avoid state lotteries. Of course, that's from reading 2. It wasn't to express feelings about gambling. 2 things. First of all, this wasn't someone's personal feelings. It was about actual statistics of how things work. Second of all, it wasn't about gambling in general. It may have seemed that way, but it was a comparison of two very specific kinds of gambling, one in particular that was emphasized as not having a good payout ratio. And it wasn't supposed to inform readers about advantages of casinos because it was more focused on informing readers of disadvantages of state lotteries. So you always want to think back, main purpose. What did the author really set out to do? Had state lotteries not existed and not had crappy payout ratios, the author never would have sat down and wrote this. So he set out to say, don't do this. Don't play a state lottery. Board game rules. I'll go quickly on this because this was probably easy. 18 was B. And because, so if you didn't get B, you can tune in for a second. A says you choose someone to go first. C, there were 25 pieces, not cards. And D was not mentioned. 19 is supposed to be B. And it says those on the board. So to make it clear that that's what they're talking about, they put that in all caps. You might have seen this passage before. I believe it's in reading 6, and these two questions are from reading 6. According to the passage, what event took place first is A. That was mentioned toward the end of the passage, but it was earlier in the week. She saw somebody she'd never seen walking down the street and reported it. They are implying that that someone is who burglarized her house. That was the first actual event. And the example of cause effect, each of these, there's like a period right in the middle. And so they're asking for cause effect, saying that the first sentence would be the cause. The second sentence would be the direct effect of the first sentence. The only two that are cause and effect directly, where the second sentence is the effect of the first sentence, is since they could not find fingerprints, she's offering a reward. That's the only two that are actually cause effect. The cooking recipe, most of you have this down pat by now. There's always a preparatory step, always. So on 22, you should drain and rinse the beans before you start. So whenever you get a recipe, and you will, there will always be something like chop onions, drain beans, something that you have to do before you get to the directions, something that's listed here, and it doesn't do itself that way. 23 asks for the mode of the passage, same thing as purpose. I get that question once in a while, what kind of passage it is. This is technical. This is 150% a technical passage. Any recipe is a technical passage. They love to mess with your head by just not giving you that option. And if they do that, there's only one secondary option, and that would be expository. The table of contents here says which page range focuses on companies' predicted profits. That's going to be under financial projections. And you'll notice year 1, 2, and 3. At first, you probably thought it's just page 17. That wasn't an option. So it's 17 through 25. Normally, these would be indented to show that those belong with financial projections. For whatever reason, they didn't. But you'll realize that because there's not an answer that just says 17. A person facing south takes a quarter turn to her left. For this question, I did this. So I made a compass. And I said a person is facing south. So she's standing right here and she's facing south. She takes a quarter turn to her left. So she's standing right here. And when she takes a quarter turn, if you're basing this on a compass, she's now facing east and standing in the center. She walks 10 paces. I made up what that would be. If you turn 180 degrees, you turn around exactly the opposite direction of where you are. So she was facing like that. She turned 180 degrees and is now facing like that. She goes another 10 paces. She literally ends up in the same place she was. She's now facing west, not east. She went east, then she went west. It said nothing about her turning around again, so she is still facing west. So that one is D. Go back to my regular pen. Which of the following sections of a text would contain specific page numbers concerning a skin condition? Anytime you see specific page numbers where you can look up the name of something and find out what page it's on, that is always an index. All of those things are from English 2. I don't know why I have English in my head. I mean reading. This, by the way, is from reading 5. So instructions where you go paces or you mess with a word or letters is from 5. This little tiny passage about baseball was pretty easy. Number 27, the conclusion you can make is that the author thinks it would be exciting to catch a home run ball. Which of the following supports an evaluation of logical argument, unbiased information? An anecdote is a story, so that doesn't go with logical. Generalizations are used when you're trying to make things sound more similar than they are. So that would go with when you're not evaluating or you're not making a logical argument. And then needless to say, emotional statements are not good for logical arguments. This presentation's one. The thing that would help show a human eye would be a cutaway. You probably already knew that from anatomy and physiology without really having to rely on what you read about that. This one is real and official for sure because I just saw this the other day. This isn't exactly how it was written. I had to write this off the top of my head trying to remember it. It's something about this person who does something where they're lifting and they're using their leg in like a repetitive manner, and they're asking what that would be consistent with. And then there's something about like a condition called bursitis relating to that. So the answer is something to do with, it would be inflammation because it's got itis in it and associated with like muscle strain, or it might have said strain and sprain. All the other answers were silly. The point was if you're making movements in a repetitive manner or you're lifting and you're doing that all day, so you're constantly putting, as I say here, strain on a certain muscle, that this is what would happen. The connecting the DVD player, again, everything in here is an official passage. There's only one question about this, number 31, and that's going to be A. Every one of these is backwards in some way. So like right there, it says video and should say audio. Right here, it says audio and should say video. And this says in and should say out. So this is really detailed. You have to be really careful that you're detailing this to get that right. This one defines a certain usage of delicate as a verb. To offer formally goes with choice A, to dedicate the old bicycle. 33, this label appears on the bottle of cough medicine. Here's some cautions. There's always one like this. They all vary a little bit. And then it always says like, you're taking this medication or somebody is, you should consult your doctor if, or it'll say you shouldn't take this if. If you have a cough for 5 days and a headache, because every other one of these fits the normal situation. So if you have a cough that lasts 4 days, that's okay because it says more than. So if you go past 4 days, that's bad, which is why 5 days is bad. All the others are well within what's appropriate for the medication. Which of the following areas of a textbook includes supplemental materials and additional information to the text? That is appendix. All of those are covered in your original Reading 2 class. So every single one of those passage types, as well as like source types, as well as primary sources, all of those are covered in your packet so that you can study and memorize all of those. 35. So this is the White House solar panels essay. I've got several questions here that are in line with what you will see if you get this passage. I'll go through them quickly. 35 is from Reading 2. What is the author's purpose? This would be to inform. Which of the following can you infer about the main idea? So this would be A, that different presidents exhibit different philosophy, and these philosophies play a role in the decisions that they make during their term. One of those decisions would be having solar panels, taking them down, depending on what the president might be passionate about or passionate against. Any of these other ones kind of have either more information than what we have, or they might be things that are opinionated. So like B has an opinion, C has information we don't have, and so on. 37, this was from Reading 3 because it is an inference. 37 is which text structure is used. That's from Reading 6. This passage is in sequence. Similarly to every time we see sequence in class or in a mock, they're never in perfect sequence. There's always an introduction that's general, or there's a paragraph that's out of sequence, like this one starts with a more current event and then goes into sequence. That's fine, because remember that with text structure, it's always the main structure. In this sequential timeline, which of these events occurred second? This is saying, and this is from 6, in comparison to each other, which event occurred second, and that would be C. So the first event was D, which was Carter's installation of the solar panels. Then Reagan was elected, because before Reagan could have removed the solar panels, he had to have been elected in office. He couldn't have removed them if he wasn't in office. Then Obama reinstalled them. In comparison to the passage, that was also the second event. It would be more confusing if you tried to pull it from the passage, because there's a couple of distractor paragraphs in the passage. But keep in mind, the thing that's supposed to be tricky about this is that Reagan's election is something that had to precede him removing the solar panels. It's not something that jumps out at you that you notice right away, because it's not one of the main pieces of the discussion. Why did the author begin the passage by talking about Barack Obama in 2012? That has to do with understanding the author's motives for putting the passage together the way that they did. And that was to relate to the author with recent and relevant events. It's more understandable to relate to the reader with things that they would understand and things that they might remember. Which of the following, if all are true, is the best detail that comes from a combination of Reading 1 and Reading 6 to support that Ronald Reagan did not see value in the solar panels? So that would be that he almost immediately ordered them to be taken down. If he saw value in them, he probably would have left them up. You can infer. Anytime you see infer or logical conclusion, you know that's from reading 3. That from the first paragraph. So only use the first paragraph to infer this answer. That solar panels increase efficiency and or reduce energy usage. So the first paragraph talks about solar panels, and we can infer that they increase efficiency or reduce energy usage. The one that you might have gotten confused with is A. The problem with A is the word most, because we can't say definitively, oh yeah, most energy usage is cut by this. We can only say, yes, it would increase efficiency or it would reduce usage. We can't say by how much. I believe the passage says 50% or almost. It says almost 50%. Almost 50% is not most. So that would actually also be incorrect. Which of the following is a logical conclusion? So also from reading 3, based on the passage. Now we're looking at the whole passage. Barack Obama and Jimmy Carter have similar views with respect to energy. We can't say they're similar presidents. We can't say they have similar views in general. But we can say with respect to energy, since they performed similar actions, went out of their way to try to conserve energy, that they must view that similarly. We cannot say somebody's a better president than somebody else. We can't say, we can say that Ronald Reagan had his staff remove solar panels, but that was very clearly stated to begin with. And we can't say that Barack Obama will be the last president to install them, because we can't prove that somebody else won't take them down and we won't put them back up yet again and repeat what we've seen in that article. The clouds article, I didn't probably write this as beautifully as it's written on the test. I totally wrote that from memory, but the main idea and purpose and all of that is the same. The author's purpose, which comes from reading 2, is to explain how clouds are categorized. That's why that was written. The best detail to support that cirrus clouds are high-level clouds. The best detail for that is they form at 2,000 feet. They mention that cumulus form at 5,000, so you have a comparison to really see that if cirrus are at 20,000, that does in fact make them high level. The one that might have confused you is seeing them out a plane window. That is not as good as a number. And don't forget, planes take off and land. So you can also see the first floor of a building out a plane window, depending on exactly when you look out that window. Below are ads for different attorneys. This is taken straight from my very last experience with the test. I found it actually kind of surprising that they went this far. The important part of this question was she wanted the best cost that is possible. I've never seen them do this. I've gotten attorney questions frequently. I've never seen them say best cost, and I've never seen them add this. So the key to this question was seeing that the answer, which is C, Harriet and Henry, had don't pay anything unless you win your case. That trumped the part about employee safety, which was the other thing they mentioned. So she had unsafe working conditions, which relates to employee safety. She also had a workers' comp thing. So these are very similar. Employee safety and workers' comp would be kind of hand in hand. Some attorneys might say they're exactly the same thing. Some might say that they're two different things. That's why you see that they all say workers' compensation. One of them decides to mention safety separately, but none of them, except for this very one, say something about not paying. I know for a fact I got that question right. So if you do that question, you do want to pick the one who is on what they call contingency, where you do not pay unless you win your case. That will be more important than an attorney who specifies safety as part of their representation. The second question asks about a Walmart factory. That's going to relate to who says they do manufacturing injuries, which is JJ and Johnson. So manufacturing is the same thing as factory. You will always get a circle graph, and you'll always get a question where they ask you to do a comparison between all the different things going on. There will always be something that says what's true based on the graph. This comes from reading 4. You'll notice that this mock was very, very heavy on reading 1, 2, and 3, very, very light on 4 and 5. That's just because the other mocks that you have already done or you are going to do, depending on when you see this one, are very heavy in 4 and 5. This is from 4. It's always kind of like this. 3 of the statements are always wrong. You always have to look at the percentages, put together the things they're talking about putting together, write them down, and figure out what's true. So the way I did this question is I looked at A, and it says more money was spent on lodging than food and drinks. Lodging is 20 versus food and drinks is 24. That means less was spent on lodging, so that's wrong. B says more money was spent on transportation and miscellaneous expenses. The two of those combined to 24. So more money was spent on them combined than food and drinks. That's actually equal to each other. So you can't say more was spent on transportaneous. Transportaneous is a good way to say transportation and miscellaneous. You can't say that more was spent on one because they are literally equal. That does not count. C said more is spent on transportation and activities combined. If you combine those, you'll get 26. If you look at airfare, you'll get 20. So C turns out to be true. The most money in a vacation is spent on lodging. Lodging is 20. As we know, food and drinks is 24. So that is untrue. You will get a question like that. 3 of the 4 statements will be false, and the best way you can quickly and efficiently figure that out is make the additions as you go, write them down next to each other, make an immediate yes or no decision, and check things off as you go. That is the number of questions you get scored on. For reading 4 and 5 mocks, I decided to go ahead and add the unscored so that you could time yourself according to how long the test literally is. I am not going to unscore questions, so you will just give me your numbers. You'll tell me how many you got right so that I can scale it to the real scored quantity. But there are 53 actual questions because they don't score 5 of them. So the next question is, what is a logical conclusion based on the graph? And the answer is D. In many cases, which is a relative term, food and drink play a big role in travel. Since that's the biggest number on the graph, we can assume that frequently that is a big part. Even if it's not the biggest part in somebody else's vacation, it is a part, and it is a big part. The graph doesn't show anything about how many people travel, so A would be totally out. Miscellaneous or part of every trip is, again, not something that we can say. Every is a very dangerous word. Always and never are things we like to avoid. Business trips involve more miscellaneous than personal is, again, something we have no idea about. Alter the following series of letters based on the instruction packet. Always write this onto your scratch paper. Check and double check your copy job when you do. It says remove the first and last letter. Then it says change all of the vowels to C. The vowels are A, E, I, O, and U. Don't forget about U. So we're going to change all of the vowels. When you do that, go ahead and copy your new word down so you don't get confused. And then it says change the first C to the letter T. I'm going to go ahead and copy my word down again. Then it says delete the first letter. Then it says, or I'm sorry, the last letter, my bad. The last letter. Then it says delete the first three. And you wind up C, 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 D, which is choice number letter B. Which of the following is not an example of cause effect? I put a colon in the middle of each of these. And what you're supposed to do is read the first part before the colon, read the second part after the colon, and determine in each of those if the part that comes after the colon is a direct and immediate cause, or I'm sorry, effect of the first half of the colon. So cause effect, I'm just trying to show with these couple of questions here how cause and effect works, because the questions that you guys get about these are really complicated. They're very hard for a lot of you to identify. All of these come from reading 6. If it's cause effect and you simplify it to its most basic form, you have a statement that's a cause and then an immediate statement that's the effect of that cause. Each and every one of these is a cause and its immediate effect, except for one. I did it that way so you can see some examples of cause effect. The one that is not is A, because you could never assume that they're like, hey, this medication's dangerous. Let's give it to someone. So the one that's not is A. The other 3 you can use as examples of what cause effect looks like. 51 is an example of problem solution structure. Same thing. Right after the colon, you will see the solution to the problem. So the first part is a problem. The second part is the direct, immediate solution to that same problem. This time it's structured normally. There is one that is a problem with its accompanying solution. There are 3 that are not. The one that is problem solution is going to be A. 52 asks for the best detail that supports the sentence below. And the sentence is Alzheimer's disease is a condition affecting many people across the nation. The best detail is that 24 million people are diagnosed with it every year. 3 of the 4 answers have numbers in them. They're all good. They're all close. The new diagnosis every year is the closest to saying it affects a lot of people. This one here is in the future. So that's not quite as good as like each year, including this one, including this year. And then to say the number doubles, it's better to be able to say like, here's how many people every year, and then follow that with the fact it doubles. So just the fact it doubles without an actual number first doesn't do as good of a job. And then D was the one you were probably like, nope, that's silly. 53 is another best detail. This one has 2 components to the sentence. One of them is that it is possible. The other that it is likely for more and more people to join the organic food movement. So it's going to grow. The amount of people who are eating organic food and part of the movement is going to grow. It is more possible and more likely. 2 parts. The one that does that is C, because it says more grocery stores are selling organic food and television marketing is aimed at the benefits. Those 2 things would both need to happen for it to be possible and likely. Possible means there's more places to get it. Likely means there's more people exposed to it. Yes, it is true that B is good because you have not only grocery stores, but farmers markets. And that makes 2 things that make it possible. But it's leaving out likely. completely. So the best answer you could possibly have would be one that says grocery stores, farmers markets, and advertising. That would be a very lengthy answer. It's unlikely that the TEAS would go quite that far, but yes, that would be a better answer than the one you picked. So your priority is to say there's two things we're trying to prove. How do we prove them both, even if we have to compromise a tiny bit on one of them to prove the other? This is the real, true, exact number of questions you will answer on your test. 5 of them won't get scored when you're on your real test, so you'll get scored out of 47. I can set up a proportional situation to show what your score really looks like. So send me a message letting me know how many you got right on this one. Certainly, if you have any major trends, go back and review. Let me know if there are any. Hopefully you did well. And that is it for Reading Mock 4. Reading Mock 5 is to come soon as well, and I will see you guys later.